Hello and welcome to Monocle on Culture. I'm Robert Bounds. On today's show, we're starting the new year off with a bang by celebrating the release of two fantastic new films. Nickel Boys is a formally inventive, beautifully rendered adaptation of a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel by Colson Whitehead. We'll hear from the director, RaMell Ross. Then the erotic thriller Babygirl, starring Nicole Kidman, depicts a lusty affair between a CEO and an intern. Monocle's Fernando Augusto Pacheco sat down with director Halina Reijn to find out more. That is all coming up here on Monocle on Culture, a worthy way to bring in 2025, even if we do say so ourselves. First up, the film Nickel Boys is adapted from Colson Whitehead's 2019 Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Nickel Boys. It tells the story of two African-American boys, Elwood and Turner, and their traumatic experience of reform school in 1960s Florida. Nickel Boys stars Brandon Wilson and Ethan Harici as those young boys, and it's the first drama from director RaMell Ross, who's known most widely for his 2018 documentary, Hale County, This Evening. Nickel Boys has already been getting lots of attention in the run-up to awards season, most notably for its formal uniqueness, shot mostly from the first-person perspective. Monocle on Culture producer Sophie caught up with RaMell Ross to discuss the film, and she began by asking how he feels about the reception it's had so far.
You know, it feels not only incredible, but kind of the most type of rewarding because, as you know, like the rules of the film, the intention of the film comes from such a sort of organized and integrity-filled place that you know you're sacrificing a bit of traditional communication with the audience in order to kind of make a statement for cinema and a statement for the Dozier boys. And so it's incredible. Like no one's typically rewarded for, doing work that has a bunch of meaning.
Yeah, as you say, that must feel so satisfying. It's both the subject matter is so meaningful, but also some of your formal choices, which I hope we'll get onto and talk about. So yeah, I'm very pleased that it's had the reception that it has so far because I thought it was amazing. And I wanted to ask about the source material. This film is based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, who's actually someone who we've had on Monocle on Culture before, and he's just the most incredible interviewee. And I wanted to ask you, when you were with the book, how you sort of thought about what you wanted to take from it and also how you wanted to change some of what was in it or make it your own as you translated it into the film.
Yeah, my co-writer and I were, maybe as expected, but deeply intimidated by the prospect of adapting the book. After you read it and then you read it again and then you read it again, you realize it actually doesn't lend itself to adaptation. It's so, for lack of a better word, perfect. It has its ecosystem of meaning, is so concise. I think what we did, it needed a sort of distillation. It needed to be sort of purged and reduced to its essence, and then kind of taking that essence over to the new medium and seeing what the medium wanted to do with that. That was how we proceeded. And I think during that process, we realized that was a way to kind of pay homage to the book, to not make the film its sort of lesser companion, but to try to see what the medium truly had to offer, Colson's kind of masterpiece.
Yeah, it really feels like something completely new, and there are so many choices. Maybe we can start off with the point of view, which obviously lots of people have talked about, but it is so striking and it's such a bold choice. Maybe you can talk about that decision to film from that first-person perspective.
Yeah, the point of view was a decision that is multi-faceted. It serves the idea of giving life and giving vision to Colson's characters, to the Dozier School boys, who Colson's narrative is about, essentially. It also allows the audience to share in their vision and in their experience. And I think that's where the real kind of breakthrough is that point of view. If you approach it more along the lines of how vision feels as opposed to what vision is, and you you approach using the camera kind of as an extension of consciousness, if you can align the audience's experience of meaning making and the visual field with the characters, then you're allowing yourself to be in the world and not see the world while they're doing things, like not watching their behavior, but experiencing it simultaneously.
Yeah, and it works so well because you are seeing most of the story from the main character's point of view, and it feels very subjective, but you're always aware that the story is a wider one. It's not just about these two people, it's about a whole system and a much wider historical context. And you talked earlier about distilling the essence of Colson Whitehead's book and then building it back up into a new thing, into a new medium, both with the point of view and also how you move around in time, and also your use of documentary footage. I wonder how all of those different elements, it feels like you had a lot of freedom as a filmmaker. I wonder if it felt a bit like that. There's a lot going on, but it all kind of perfectly fits into the story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah, there is a lot going on. And I think one of the core, there's so many core things to the film as you're implying. It's really just full of ideas. One thing that Jocelyn and I wanted, Jocelyn Barnes is the co-writer, also a producer on the film, but one thing we wanted to do was to make sure that Colson's narrative was connected to the larger kind of ongoing cultural conversation around race, around visuality. You know, you realize that in order for the Nickel boys and the Dozier School boys to be treated the way that they were treated by those who ran the school, but also those who, it's tough to call it a school because it wasn't a school at all. And those in the community, they need to be seen a certain way. They needed to be, it's part and parcel with the visualization of people of color over time. And so we kind of set out to find images that could offer not only a peek into the way that folks had been captured by cameras in different archives, but also the different modes of production that have sort of produced notions of Blackness. And the documentary element, I think, exists if you're kind of using any archival footage. It just feels like it's nonfiction or it's documentary. But using the Dozier School boys' images themselves and a lot of forensic images from the Dozier Report, which was done by the University of Southern Florida, that's kind of where this sort of aching truth is built into the film.
Yeah, and it's so cleverly woven in. And that documentary element, you're best known until now, best known as the filmmaker behind the documentary Hale County This Morning, This Evening from 2018. And did you always want to go into feature filmmaking? And did you always imagine yourself as maybe a feature filmmaker who would bring in a lot of documentary elements, or did that just come completely naturally because it fit this project so well? Or was that kind of always how you were thinking about the sort of evolution of your craft, I guess?
It came pretty naturally because I don't make strong distinctions between filmmaking genres. I think of film as a type of, knowledge production. And then depending on the way in which you want the world to approach it, that determines what genre you should gear the art towards, just to be, literally categorized by or labeled. Documentary is a genre in which when people approach it, they are predisposed to truth. And that's not something that happens in any other context, right? Like when you walk outside, you're not like, oh, that is true. And we know one's in the world, but to turn on the switches of truth in your brain is something documentary offers. And so Hale County This Morning, This Evening started off as a sort of art project. And then about 3/4 of the way through, realized that if I could get the way that these images were existing to be categorized as truth, to be called documentary images, then you're changing the way that someone sees a type of person. And so for this film, never approached it thinking about including quote unquote documentary footage, knew that we were going into the fiction space. But to me, fiction is stronger in this case if it has images that are really grounded and maybe even literally come from the ground.
Yeah, it's so interesting hearing you talk about it. I wanted to ask you as well, you obviously were kind of taking the novel and also all of this kind of documentary footage and all of these things. And I wonder if there are any other kind of reference points or reading materials that maybe are slightly less kind of not predictable, but less, maybe more unusual, that were kind of informing how you made this film as you were doing it, things that you were seeing or reading or listening to or whatever it might be.
Oh yeah, of course. I think it's funny to kind of reference oneself, but the language of the film emerges from How County This Morning, This Evening. It's like a direct extension. There's a couple shots that really overlapped. It was the proof of concept, and it's a film sort of form and approach that is very much tied to poetry, and very much tied to music. Allen Ginsberg's Howl was and is probably the most influential piece of writing for my film practice. Also, there's musicians like sort of Arthur Russell, who the way that I feel when I'm encountering his songs and listening to them, I'm trying to, with images, often approach that type of spontaneity and that type of this sort of just unexpected rendezvous of sensations. It's fascinating to pull from, prose and music, because it allows you to not take the image literally, which I think is the most dangerous thing for photography and film. Though, of course, it is something that can reproduce reality to some degree. Images are in conversation with images. They're rarely in conversation with the world. They're so pointillistic and authored and perspectival and just replete with a type of utility that they are deeply deceiving.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I never would have kind of chosen those as reference points, but now you say them, I can completely see how that fits. I've just got one quick final question, which is just we haven't talked about the cast, but you've got this amazing cast in Nickel Boys, and I particularly wanted to kind of point out the chemistry between the two main characters, and it's just so pitch perfect. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how easy or difficult it was to cast, and particularly with the characters of Alwood and Tanner.
Well, it's such a tough question to think about in hindsight. It's like, well, we got them and it worked out, and it was easy to some degree when we found them, but to find them was hard, and to make to acknowledge that they're the ones, however much you feel that they are, in the moment, you're like, it feels right, but am I deceiving myself? Do I just want to make the film so bad that I think that these two are it? But I will say, I think that we were all, the producers and our casting team, were all head over heels for these guys. They stood out very glowingly amongst some of the other tapes. And then once we had our chemistry read with them, we actually thought that they were friends for a very, very, very long time, because the way that they were talking beforehand and talking after, it led us to believe that they had just met. And I think after that chemistry read, we knew we had a film.
That was Nickel Boys director RaMell Ross in conversation with Monocle on Culture producer Sophie. And the film is out now. Next up, the award-winning Babygirl, directed by Dutch actress, writer and director Halina Reijn, is a steamy affair. The film features Nicole Kidman in the main role as Romy Mathis, a high-powered CEO who engages in a lusty affair with a young intern played by Harris Dickinson.
Hey.
Hey, we need to have a conversation. You're very young. I don't want to hurt you.
I think I have power over you. I could make one call and you lose everything. Does that turn you on when I say that?
Babygirl is an interesting exploration of power and takes a refreshing view on sexuality. Monocle Radio's senior correspondent, Fernando Augusto Pacheco, sat down with Halina Reijn and began by asking her about her connection with the genre.
I feel very connected to all the erotic thrillers of the 90s because I was young then, and I was always struggling a little bit as a woman, but also as a human, with my own sexual fantasies and sexual desires. And I always felt very much isolated and that I was weird and that I wasn't normal. And when I saw 9.5 Weeks or Fatal Attraction or Indecent Proposal and Disclosure and all of those Unfaithful, I felt, oh, it's okay to have these darker feelings. It was also a time where there was no internet, so it was really hard to even know anything about sexuality in that sense. So they were very liberating to me. But what I didn't like about them was that at a certain moment, someone was killed, or the woman who cheated had to be punished, and they were very sexist in that way. And so when I had the idea myself to create something in the sexual space, I wanted to give it a different twist and play with the tropes and have fun with them and be entertaining and be in conversation with them. Because I don't know if you remember, but when Samuel's dancing to father figure and she sits in the chair, you could say that's mirroring 9.5 Weeks with Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke, and Kim Basinger dancing on the Joe Cocker song. So all of that is in there. But in the end, for me, it was important to really show that in all the characters are humans, and all of them are dark and light and good and evil, and not to say that's the villain.
I love that. And by the way, talking about erotic thrillers, you did work with Paul Verhoeven, very famously. How was the conversations with him? Was he an inspiring figure in your directing career, not just acting?
Oh, yes, definitely. Paul Verhoeven, I did Black Book with as an actress, but I was a fan of his work way before that with Turkish Delight and The Fourth Man. Yes, he has been incredibly important to me. He was always supportive of me wanting to be a director and wanting to write. And he taught me that if I wanted to make a feature film, it would help me to have a specific question. And so with this movie, I asked myself, is it possible to love all the different layers of myself and embrace them and accept them, instead of thinking, well, this is something that I like to present to the outside world and to my friends or to my family or to my coworkers, and these parts of myself I better hide because I don't even want to look at them myself. And in Babygirl, you see a woman, Romy, played by Nicole Kidman, who is not honest with herself, who's not capable of saying, yes, there is a beast inside me. Yes, I have sexual desires. Yes, she just wants to be whatever her husband likes. She literally says that to him, like, I want to be what you like. I want to be normal. And that's her mistake. And that goes for a lot of humans, but especially for women, because we still are not at ease with that part of ourselves. We think it's more important that the man has a good time, and then that makes us more valuable. But it's not like that. We should slowly but move towards what do we want, what do we like? And often we don't even know. So this movie is an exploration of that.
And that's what's so fantastic about the film. It is pro-desire, it is pro-sex. And because you mentioned erotic thrillers, somebody dies, something horrible happens. Not necessarily in Babygirl, no spoilers here. But tell me, what do you think, Halina? Do you think audiences are becoming more puritanical? There's been a lot of debate. There's been a lack of sex in the big films. What do you think? How do you see the cinema industry? Of course, you come from the Netherlands, which I think is a little bit different than the US. But how do you see sex in cinema these days?
Well, I do think after Me Too, it made sense that we are all a little bit taken aback, that we have a bad taste in our mouth when it comes to sexuality. For me, the Me Too movement was incredibly important. I was an actress at that time, and it changed everything for me. So I feel very much part of that movement. And I understand that after that, we were more careful around the subject. And it took us a little bit of time as a world to kind of go back to it in a way. And I do think we are more ready now. And me coming from the theater, where I had to do all these classical playwrights, I was in all these classical plays. All these things are about desire and control and surrender and sex and violence, because basically these themes are the essence of life. So, of course, we try to push them away, but we can't deny them because we're human and we all come from sex, literally. Somebody has sex and that's why we were born. So that's basically how simple it is. So if you want to create stories, it's important to also create stories about that subject. So that is why I think it's very exciting that there are more movies also in America, not just in Europe, because in Europe we're always a little more liberated. But that America is also really ready for it. And you look at Queer, you look at Challengers, like a lot of movies now dare to go there. So yes, and we are part of that. But at the same time, I think if you really look at my movie closely, there's not much sex in it at all. It's all very much in the mind. And it feels maybe for some people very erotic, but at the same time, it's only suggestion. And in the end, the movie is about a woman in an existential crisis, and sex is only a metaphor for her to liberate herself.
It's undeniable, the chemistry between Nicole Kidman and Harris Dickinson. I mean, how fantastic. First of all, before talking about those two, how did Nicole Kidman become interested in the project? Did you knew her before? Did you send her the script? Or how did that work? Because, let's be honest, for a Hollywood actress, I don't like this word, but almost brave to do a film like this in the context, right?
No, absolutely. She found me. She's a very special woman in the sense that she really tries to do her utter best to see every little small movie that is made by a woman all over the world. So she somehow found my movie Instinct, which is my first Dutch film. And she really loved it. And we started to talk and work on some things. But then after Bodies, I really felt a huge urge to create something myself and write something myself from the start. But when she heard the title, because we kept communicating, she was already incredibly interested. And then she read a very early draft of the script and she immediately said that she wanted to do that. And of course, that was a dream because, like you said, even though I know that she is still scared of all these things and she still goes there, as an actress, I would always try to channel her because of that reason, because I saw all her work and was obsessed with her. And when I was afraid to go on stage or afraid to play in certain scenes, I would always try to become her in order to find the courage. So then for her to actually be with me physically and play this part, it was almost unbelievable. I'm just so grateful that people really see that she's, even so late in her life, she's doing new things. She's exploring new parts of her talent, new parts of her. And that is why this movie is so exciting to watch, because you really see her go into different areas of what she's capable of doing.
And Samo is a very interesting character as well, played by Harris Dickinson, because, again, he could have easily become the bad guy somehow, but not necessarily in that sense, right? That's the complexity of sex and desire. What about Harris Dickinson? Tell me a bit more, and the chemistry, because you could see, as you say, maybe not the many sex scenes, but there was some desire, tension in the air.
No,
Good tension.
Yes, I feel that the electricity between Nicole Kidman and Harris Dickinson is insane. Once I knew that she was going to play the lead, of course, the next question is who's going to play Samuel, because you need a young man that is capable of holding his own with her, and she's of course one of the biggest actors in the world, a true icon, and yet the assignment will be for this young man to dominate her, so as an actor that requires so much, not only in technique but also in daring to be in the moment. And then one of the most important things of our movie is humor, so you also need someone who's able, who has a sense of humor and who's able to act out these comedy elements of it all. So I was like, oh my God, who's going to do that? And then accidentally, I was seeing the premiere in New York of Triangle of Sadness, and Harris stars in that. And immediately I was like, who is that? And then I explored all his earlier work, and especially the movie Beach Rats. For anybody who hasn't seen it, please, please, please go see it. It's one of the best movies ever. And his talent is just beyond. And then he has this weird quality of being able to really communicate this confidence and this masculine energy, but then suddenly within a second he can change into a vulnerable young boy. And that's exactly what I wanted, because again, we're playing with cliches and we're having fun with cliches in my movie, but we really wanted to make something unique. And for me, the dynamic of him being the dominant in the sexual dynamic and her being the submissive, I wanted the movie also to be about masculinity and him exploring that, not knowing how to do it, not knowing how to be strong with a woman like that who's so powerful. He's the intern. So I really wanted someone who was able to show the question of who am I as a man and who am I allowed to be in modern times as a man.
It's so beautiful when she tells him in bed, when say, actually, I think you're a sensitive guy because you understood what I needed right from the beginning of the film, right?
Yes, I think we gave him this backstory that I said to him, you acted as if you're a psychic. You kind of feel what she wants and needs before she even knows what she wants and needs. And in the beginning, there's a scene, we call it the cookie scene. They haven't really talked to each other yet. And he, on the streets, prevented the dog from attacking her. And so she asked, how did you get that dog to calm down? And he said, well, I gave it a cookie. Why, do you want one? And so immediately the tone is set. He's not, even though he looks up to her and he's intimidated by her, at the same time, he's this representation of Gen Z, a little bit of a cliche, but that they're more confident, and they don't have that much respect for authority. And so he immediately just goes through all of the etiquette and all of the politeness. And he also says a very fatherly thing in that scene. He goes, you shouldn't drink coffee after lunch. He's telling her immediately what to do. And then you can see her, and she just walks out. But that is sort of the start of theirs. The sexual dynamic.
I love the music scenes. It's funny you mentioned the George Michael scene with Father Figure. Best usage of George Michael's song in a film, I have to say. But the rave scene, it's incredible. And I think I would like to recommend people to watch in a big screen in a way, because you can feel it pulsating. How important was the score and the music for this film in particular?
incredibly important. I'm obsessed with music and sound. I think sound is the whole soundscape of the movie is such an important layer of how to experience a story, and especially if you're talking about intimacy, sexuality. How much do you hear, the breath, and we work that into the score as well. The composer, who also, Cristobal, his name is, he also did White Lotus. Maybe some people recognize kind of the primal nature of how he makes music, of his style. And he used Nicole's real breath to create this score that is all about primal feelings. And even if Nicole and Harris are fighting and scenes seem very dark, there's still this kind of almost playful music signaling to the audience. Even though they seem to be blackmailing each other and the stakes are high, it's still a sexual game. Everything is about power and control and submission and dominance. And so the music was very important. And then for the rave, I used Yellow Claw, which those are friends of mine. They're a Dutch DJ duo, of which one of them is also a movie director. And I love their music. And so we really created kind of a rave. And Nicole Kidman, not being able to go to raves because of her fame, really enjoyed it and kept dancing. I didn't want to stop dancing in between takes. So this was very special. And I agree with you. The best way to experience is to go to the cinema and really see her liberate herself, because that is what it is about in essence, is a woman who tries to suppress the chaos of her childhood, but then during our movie meets Harris, and Harris takes her to this rave, and there she's almost back to how she was as a child, wildly dancing like a hippie.
That was Halina Reijn, director of Babygirl, which will be out in the UK on the 10th of January. And that is all for this week. My thanks to Fernando, Augusto, Pacheco, and of course to Sophie. And Nickel Boys is out in cinemas now. Monocle on Culture is produced by Sophie Monaghan-Coombs and Steph Chungu, and Steph also edits the show. Many thanks this week to Hunter Wang for his help with editing. We'll be back at the same time next week, but until then, from me, Robert Bound, thanks for tuning in.